Welcome to Tutorial 2 for Predictor. Predictor is a graphic fee and assessment forecasting and planning system for condominium and homeowner associations. Tutorial 1 demonstrated how to use Predictor to forecast and manage the fees associated with annual operating expenses. Here in Tutorial 2, we demonstrate the use of Predictor to forecast and manage that portion of monthly fees related to future capital expense.
As was the case with operating expenses, we must now enter the projected capital expenses that we can foresee. Estimates can be obtained by contracting for a capital reserve study or using the judgment of the Board of Trustees. Enter these projected capital expenses using today's dollars, in other words, constant dollars. Predictor will inflate the costs using the user estimated inflation percentages in each category. You can see the inflated results by scrolling down beneath the data entry table. In this demonstration, the capital expense funding alternative screen has been amended to better convey the use of the screen and to highlight the screen's major features. Predictor's actual capital expense funding alternative screen has more information displayed, but let's get familiar with what we see in this demonstration version. You start by entering basic data in response to the prompts at the top of the screen. On the left is a table, the columns of which impact the end-of-year capital reserve balance, which is displayed in column I. The column on the far left of the table lists the inflated annual capital requirements, which were identified on the previous future capital expenses screen that we completed. Adjacent to that column are the contribution amounts transferred from the operating account in the corresponding year. Until we start creating a solution, the rest of the columns are blank except for column I. The top graph on the right of the screen reflects the balances shown in column I. Since we have not yet added any new income, the graph shows the future deficits that we face. Our task on this screen is to eliminate those projected deficits. As before, yellow cells indicate that the user can enter data. In the table on the left, a user can adjust Predictor's fee recommendations as well as any assessment recommendations. Column D gives the user the ability to make relatively minor changes to the projected end-of-year balance by calling for a 13th month assessment in selected years. To do so, all the user has to do is type in the word yes in the appropriate cells in the table. On the far right side of the screen are the following graphs. The capital reserve annual end-of-year balance, which reflects column I, a graph of fee levels resulting from capital expenses and total fee levels, considering those associated with annual operating expenses, and a cash flow risk diagram, which will be described later. Okay, now that we're familiar with the screen, let's start solving the problem of funding the capital expense requirements. As a reminder, our strategic objective is to maintain monthly fees near constant for as long as possible, up to perhaps 10 years. Another objective is to minimize the total fee increase over the next 20 years. In our example, you'll remember that the best that could be done in terms of total fee increase due to operating expenses was $275 more than the current baseline of $417 a month. The challenge then is to minimize the total fee due to operating expenses and capital expenses to be sustained by the association. Lastly, a significant amount of funds have been transferred to the capital reserve account, and that will ease the additional fee requirements. So let's get going on capital expenses. As a baseline, just as we did on the operating expense side, let's use the just-in-time strategy so we can compare it with other approaches to funding the capital costs. To start, let's enter basic data at the top of the screen. Let's assume the association prefers a maximum fee increase from year to year of $50. Now let's set the target carryover from year to year at $100,000. The purpose of this level is to always have funds available for unforeseen capital expenses. We're accommodating for all known projected expenses in this case. This level is arbitrary and is up to the individual association. Next, enter the amount of money you want to have on hand at year end. An entry of 1.0 indicates the association prefers to have on hand all of the money required for the next year to be available at the beginning of the year. A level of 0.5 indicates willingness to have half of the money available, with the rest being gathered during the subsequent year. Cash flow risk graphic is green if the criteria is being met, red if the end of year cash available is less than half the desired amount, and yellow if it is in between the two. In this case, I'll enter 0.75. Now let's ask for a just-in-time solution by clicking yes in the appropriate box. We see that Predictor has solved the problem by requiring a total fee increase of $171 over the next 20 years. Unlike the operating side, where excess money has a place to go, in other words, to the capital side, when it comes to capital expenses, the just-in-time discipline results in excess funds being refunded. In this particular example, since our starting balance is $200,000, and we have asked to maintain $100,000, we have funds in excess of what is required for just-in-time, and so they are shown as refunds. Likewise, in any particular year, if the funds available exceed the requirements, Predictor will call for a refund. It's likely that a board would like to avoid refunds and use them as a contingency, so I've done that here and adjusted them to 0. The results now show a cumulative assessment of $23,838 over the 20 years. But because we did not allow refunds, as the capital reserve balance graph shows, we're now in a position to significantly reduce fees in the later years. Here's one example of the impact of fee reductions in certain years. Notice the adjustments in the capital fee user adjust column, column B. However, to be fair and accurate, we should not ignore the roughly $24,000 special assessment, which translates to an equivalent average fee over the 20-year span of $1,200 per year to be collected by the association. With 100 units in the association, this would add $1 a month. Therefore, the net fee resulting from this modified just-in-time strategy for capital expenses is realistically negative $75. As you're dealing with estimates, we can ignore this little adjustment, but it's a reminder that when we have a mix of fee changes and assessments, you should look at the impact of those assessments on the average fee over the time frame of interest. Since our objective is to reduce the combined fee for operating and capital expenses, the question arises as to whether we can do better with an early funding approach or assessment-only approach on the capital side. Let's take a quick look at an assessment-only approach. As instructed, at the top of the page, we simply say that we want a $0 increase from one year to another, and then ask for a just-in-time solution. As before, we have an instant solution, with the result being an average assessment per unit of roughly $24,000 over the 20-year period, if we allow refunds during years when the balance exceeds our stated maximum. In our particular case, we stated that our strategy is to keep fees as low as possible. An assessment-only strategy would certainly work on its own with no changes. In other words, it would allow the refunds to occur. Given that we want to drive the total fee lower, though, if we deny the refunds, we can take the additional step of turning those savings into fee reductions. Let's take a look at what happens when we do that. To begin with, I've removed all refunds. This allows us to introduce some fee reductions while keeping an eye on the fee graphs. We can see the change in the combined operating and capital fee. It should be apparent that there are many alternative solutions. In this example, we have an overall fee reduction of $115 over the 20-year period. As we found before, the $33,000 resulting assessment should not be completely ignored, but it only adds about $1.50 more per month per unit with our 100-unit association. Here our solution has improved from the $76 capital expense related fee reduction we achieved with the just-in-time strategy to a $115 reduction with a modified assessment-only strategy. So now let's take the final step and take a look at early funding. Here are the final results of one early funding approach generated by entering $93 or more as a capital user fee adjustment in year 2020. In this case, we entered $100. In terms of meeting the strategic objective of stabilizing fees for as long as possible and keeping overall fees 20 years from now to be as low as possible, the early funding strategy shows its strength once again. If an association is willing to pre-fund expenses by having a fee increment significantly larger than what is required, the long-term advantages are significant. In this particular case, a $100 fee increase is required in 2020, and because of an exceptional $1.4 million expense in 2031, over a 3-year time period starting in 2028, $275 in monthly fee increases are also required. However, that sets the stage for fee reductions of $100 a month for the following 5 years. The net result is a capital expense plan that results in a $225 fee reduction over the 20-year period, thereby reducing the combined operating and capital fee to a total of $50. One final note on this. Rather than undergoing the temporary large fee increases to cover the 2031 $1.4 million expense in our example, it may be more advantageous to take on a short-term loan. Predictor can also accommodate the use of debt, either fixed term or by credit line, and details are in Predictor's help screens. Let's complete our tour of Predictor. This screen, the Combined Operating and Capital Account Summary screen, summarizes all of the results for the solution that we have created. The Unit Fee Analysis screen shows the forecast of resultant fee changes and any assessments for each type of individual unit within the association. So that's Predictor. Clearly, we've been able to achieve our objective of stabilizing fees and, for the most part, keeping them as low as possible. That's the power of Predictor. Whatever the strategic objectives may be, it should be clear that with Predictor there are countless ways an association can proceed.